I think we can all agree that Stephen King is one of the most prolific authors of the past century. His books have influenced countless authors and set the foundation for modern horror media. I think he's the only writer whose books have given me a feeling of dread when I'm just on the second page. He's written novels that are hit after hit, and his life is just as fascinating as any story that he's ever written. Over the years, many people have asked King which one of his novels was his favorite, and he's always said that it was The Dead Zone, and that really shouldn't be a surprise. Even though King was a successful author before Dead Zone was published, this would be his first massive hit that would put him on the map and set him down the road to become the legend we know today. And I have to agree, The Dead Zone is one of his best novels, right up there in my top 5 favorite King books. This story revolves around a man named Johnny Smith, who after an accident falls into a coma for the next 5 years. When he awakens, he discovers that part of his brain is damaged beyond repair. He dubs this part of his brain the Dead Zone. Because of this damage, his brain compensates by developing psychic powers. He can now see visions by touching objects and people, and eventually sees a vision of a corrupt and sadistic senator named Greg Stilson becoming president and causing a global nuclear war which kills billions. Because of this, Smith tries to assassinate Stilson to stop this horrific future from ever occurring. In 1983, the novel would be turned into a film, directed by David Cronenberg and starring Christopher Walken, which was released to critical acclaim. The Dead Zone was one of the few Stephen King adaptations that completely worked. For years, the majority of King's adaptations would either be horrible or so distant from the source material that they were just in name only. For decades, this 1983 film was the only adaptation of The Dead Zone that was ever made. But in 2002, a new take on the novel was created, this time for television. The series would create a dedicated following that is still praising it long after its cancellation. It was one of a group of massive hits for the USA Network that were being produced at the time. Not to mention, it would set a historic record of the highest ratings for a premiere of a cable series in television history at 6.4 million viewers. It would also push up the career of Anthony Michael Hall to a whole new level. It is one of my top 5 favorite TV shows of all time. But does it still hold up? Well, let's take a walk down the mysterious Dead Zone to find out. And luckily we've got 2 stars of the show, John L. Adams and Kristen Dalton, who will be leading the way in this episode of Gone, But Not Forgotten. The Dead Zone TV series was developed by legendary writer-producer, the late Michael Piller, and his equally talented executive producer's son, Sean Piller. It all began when executive producer Lloyd Sagan was in a library looking for a book that he was trying to get the rights to adapt. While doing that, he came across another novel, The Dead Zone, and immediately thought it would be a great property to adapt for TV. And the first person he thought of to develop the series was the late Michael Piller. I've talked about Piller already before in my Star Trek Deep Space Nine episode. This guy had a legendary career, and has even been credited by many for saving Star Trek. Piller and his son Sean would begin to work on developing The Dead Zone for UPN. They went through many different possible versions of the film. In one version, they thought about making the show as a continuation of the book, with Johnny on the run from either assassinating Stilson or just failing to do so. But Piller discarded this because then it would have been The Fugitive with psychic powers. Instead, he thought it would be more interesting to expand on the beginning and the middle of the book, and thus explores more of Johnny's life and the struggles of accepting his powers. Piller's first choice for the lead role was Anthony Michael Hall. For many years, Hall would be known for his work with John Hughes, 3 of their biggest films being The Breakfast Club, 16 Candles, and my personal favorite, Weird Science. Contrary to popular belief, Hall's career never declined after his 80s heyday. He did have a few stumbles though, such as being a cast member on Saturday Night Live with Robert Downey Jr. It ended up lasting for only 1 season, which would later be known as a rough transitional period for SNL. But then he made a huge mistake when he starred in the box office bomb, Johnny Be Good. Then he recovered by playing the main antagonist of Tim Burton's Edward Scissorhands, as Winona Ryder's jealous boyfriend Jim. Then his following film would be his career turning point, with a small role as a gay man in 6 Degrees of Separation, a performance that many people pointed to as a highlight of the film. Then he would portray Bill Gates in the TNT original movie, The Pirates of Silicon Valley, which got him the attention of Michael Piller. Michael was so impressed with his performance as Gates that he decided he wanted Hall for the role of Johnny Smith. The rest of casting would soon begin. The first task was trying to find the actress who would play Johnny's true love, Sarah. Nicole DeBoer knew Piller because of her time in Star Trek Deep Space Nine, playing the role of Ezri Dax. After seeing her chemistry with Anthony Michael Hall, she was quickly hired. This was soon followed up by casting Chris Bruno in the role of Sarah's new husband, Sheriff Walt Bannerman. The other main cast member was Johnny's physical therapist and best friend, Bruce Lewis, played by John L. Adams. I asked John a little bit about the show's audition process.
I remember I was driving somewhere one day and a buddy of mine, shout out to Shaka Foreman. I don't know where you are, bro. You seeing this? Holla at your boy. But Shaka calls me and he's like, yo, man, there's an audition for this show. I think you could be perfect for it. And I'm like, all right. I was familiar with the Dead Zone, the Christopher Walken and Martin Sheen movie.
Yeah.
And he goes, yeah, man. He sends me the breakdown. He forwarded it to me and I read it and it was like 28 to 30, 33 years old, dreadlocks, blah, blah, blah. Like, and I'm just like, yo, that's me.
Wow, they actually had like already in the description, like, dreadlocks and stuff like that. Wow,
All that, man. Yeah, no, it was me. Like the way the breakdown was written, if somebody had put that on the sign of a wanted poster, I would have left California. Because I'm like, they're gonna come get me. Like it was me. The breakdown was me. And originally, and maybe a lot of people don't know this, but originally Bruce was Jamaican. When I auditioned for the project, everything was like, yeah, man, see, Johnny, what you gonna do, Bridget? So you can't sit here all day, you must get up. You know what I mean? So it's like that was Bruce originally. And then when I went and tested for it, they got rid of the Jamaican accent. They were like, yeah, we're not doing that.
Before we continue with our video, here's a reminder to click the store tab on any of our JoBlo channels and browse our collection of the latest and freshest designs in our merch store. Go get you some.
Another important character would be Reverend Eugene Gene Purdy, played by the legendary Broadway actor David Ogden Stiers. I hesitate to use the term Broadway actor, since Stiers has been known for a variety of roles that would be fondly remembered. Major Winchester in MASH, Cogsworth in Beauty and the Beast, and the first person to portray John Jones, aka the Martian Manhunter. Okay, well, maybe that last one is better left forgotten. Kristen Dalton would play Johnny's love interest for a time on the show, reporter Dana Bright. Kristen had been acting for years beforehand. After the Dead Zone, she would have one of her most famous roles as the girlfriend of Jack Nicholson in the Martin Scorsese blockbuster, The Departed. The reason why she was cast was because the first pilot for the Dead Zone didn't go according to plan. John Adams would go into more detail with me regarding the changes that were made to the pilot, which had to be reshot.
But you guys had like an unnarrated pilot, right? You had to like redo the pilot, or because I know there was the original actor who played Dana Bright, the reporter.
It was original Dana Bright. There was also a different Purdy.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so Michael Moriarty, who used to be on, I think he was like on the first couple of seasons of the original Law and Order. He was hired to be Purdy, and then they replaced him with David Ogden Stiers. So yeah, we had to redo that, and then we separated it. So the pilot is really 2 episodes, but we were trying to shoot them together, but when they replaced them, we did have to do reshoots. They just wanted to crystallize the vision of the show.
Well, do you know why they kind of replaced the original actors for these 2 characters? Like, just didn't fit? Or...
No, it wasn't that. It wasn't that it didn't fit. I'm sorry about that. No, it wasn't that it didn't fit. No, people were going through issues, man. There's a lot of stress. People dealt with it differently. Some people dealt with it better than others. Some people proved that they were like Michael Moriarty. I think from my perspective, he just didn't. Whereas his acting, in my estimation, his acting was good. I like Michael Moriarty as an actor, and I had a brief interaction with him on set. But I just think maybe he didn't get along with the powers that be, for whether it was personal reasons or whether it be something else. But that's really what it was where he was concerned. Other than that, I think that they just wanted to take a break and regroup and come back. I think it was just personal issues between some of the actors and the producers.
The original actress who portrayed Dana Bright was actress Kendall Cross. Her take on Dana was a bit timid, and not the in-your-face cocky reporter that Dalton would go on to portray. Look, I'll show you.
Dana Bright, Bangor Daily News, Mr. Smith. So are you saying that you can help the sheriff's department find our strangler?
Hey, don't answer that. Let's go into my office. Alone. Do you have anything better to do, Dana?
No.
Dana Bright, Bangor Daily News. Mr. Smith, are you saying that you can help the sheriff's department catch the strangler?
Don't answer that. Step into my office. Alone. Do you have anything better to do, Dana?
No.
I asked Kristen what her audition and experience reshooting the Dead Zone pilot were like.
You know, I remember that day because I had a bunch of castings that day. I usually don't like to have more than one in a day. And on that day, I think I had 3. And then they called me. It was sort of a last minute one. And I went into Pillar's office, and I remember all the people sitting there, and I read my scene. I had the sides in my hand, but I never looked down at them. And every time I'd finish a page, I think I just would throw it off to the side. And I had another casting to go to afterwards. So I finished the last line and I threw the sides over onto the floor. And I said, "Thank you very much." And I ran out the door and I was like literally changing in the hallway into my outfit for the next one. And I got a phone call. I think it was that night that I got the job, and I had to fly right away out to Canada because they were in a big hurry. So I had to reshoot the pilot, and they had to do that right away. And being that I had to reshoot the pilot and that they had already filmed with somebody, I had been in that position before where I had to do that. And it's always a little bit tough because everybody's already all worked together. Everybody's already a big group, and you're coming in there and replacing somebody who potentially they've all made friends with and, you know, has become their friend and who they like very much. And now you're this new person so there's always that. But it went great. I was super happy with it. Everybody was lovely.
Now, what I loved about the show was that its characters were so complex. For example, when you meet Walt, you think that he's a jerk who's jealous of Johnny, but eventually he would trust and become friends with him. Walt wasn't an obstacle that Johnny had to overcome to be with Sarah. He knew Walt was a good man and devoted to her. Not to mention, he was a great father to Johnny's son. So it became a struggle to keep his feelings for Sarah a secret in order not to betray Walt. Then you had Purdy, a man who has secret agendas and craves power. Yet that turns out to not always be the case. It's revealed that he's a spiritual man who believes he's doing God's work, even if he bends the rules. He loved Johnny's mother and even covered up her suicide. It would have been easy to say that Purdy was a good guy or a bad guy, but like all great characters, he lived in between those labels. Yes, he would use Johnny from time to time to promote his religious university and foundation called Faith Heritage, but he was also protective of Johnny and treated him like his son. John Adams would eventually direct an episode of the series that delved more into Purdy's past and motivations. This episode was called Revelations, where it's revealed that Gene was a traveling preacher who took advantage of his rich patrons. Eventually, he manipulates a rich widow into giving him money, only to discover that she died, believing that he healed her. The guilt he would experience set him down a path of redemption. John told me a bit about his experience given the chance to direct.
When I directed the episode of The Dead Zone, I loved it.
Mm-hmm.
But directing is such a different type of intensity. For like 2 years, I knew I wanted to direct. So for like 2 years, I I didn't go to school to do it. I didn't go to film school. I would go on all of my off days and just hang out in the editing bay. I would follow producers whenever they would do location scouting. I would have lunch with them. I would talk to them about how you create set lists and all that kind of stuff. And so from at the end of the first season, for the next year or two, that's all I was doing in my off time, was just trying to learn what that is.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got on set, and I remember this story. Rob Petrovich came to me and he said, "Okay, John, we're going to let you direct." And I'm like, "Great." And he goes, "But you got one rule." And I'm like, "What's that rule?" And he goes, "You can't cry." And I go, "I can't, so I'm not going to cry." So he goes, "All right, you can't cry." So I'm like, "Okay." And in the episode that I directed, when we're at the fairground, they had found this location. It was a big open field. They had mowed this field down and they turned it into a fairground, and everything was great. The day we showed up, it starts to rain. Now, I don't know if you know about like farm fields with hay on them, but the soil is much different. So when it rains, it just becomes waterlogged. Everything was soggy. Everything. And it's supposed to be like a summer night and the sun is shining. I mean, or the, the moon is bright, the stars are out. That's what it's supposed to be. But it's just like mud it's just a big field of mud with all these the series regulars, the extras, everybody. And so I'm sitting there and I'm looking at it, and this is like dolly grips are picking up tracks and setting them in the mud and moving things around, and they're trying to get these shots. So they're setting up for the next shot, and I walk around with my set list, and I'm in this tent, and I'm like, we're so far behind, which every director's behind.
Mm-hmm.
But we're so far behind, and I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden I'm looking at my set list, and like these little drops of water started to hit my sheet. And I'm like, the tent must be leaking. And I was like, "No, Negro, your eyes are leaking. Like, you are so frustrated right now." It was crazy, man. Like the pressure and the stress of like, I got to get this in. I only got like 2 hours to get these 4 shots and then get out of here. And And I didn't have enough experience at the time to know how to navigate that stuff, but I was surrounded by an amazing cast and crew. I mean, it's like everybody just did their thing. Lou was saying, like, put the camera here, move this here. Rob was doing this thing. Sean Pillar, who was an executive producer on the show, he was like, "Let's do this, I'm like, "Man, whatever you guys want to do so I can get out of this day, I will do."
Yeah.
And then I was acting in it too. So then I'm doing all that, and they'd be like, "Okay, cut. All right, John, go get in the wardrobe. Now you got to do this other thing." And I'm trying to remember. It was a lot. It was an amazing experience. I love the directing component of it. I love being involved with the other actors. I love the planning perspective of it, being with the producers and location managers, and even the business side of it. You're like, "Man, if we do that, we're going to turn around. That's going to cost us this amount of money." And so you're just continually problem solving, as a director. But it was great, man.
Now, as I said before, this show was originally pitched to UPN, but the deal would fall apart. Then the USA Network got interested when they heard about the project, so it got picked up and would become an instant hit. Many of the show's fans were impressed not only because of the acting and the stories, but also the technical aspects of the series. I remember watching the show and being in awe of the special effects. What I think was unique about it was how much they could use Johnny's vision to push the story not only forward, but on its head as well. Johnny could use his powers to see the future as well as the past. Not only that, but it was the way he saw his visions that was unique. Sometimes they would be straightforward, like seeing someone getting coffee spilled on them. But then there were other times where he could go into the past and freeze time to get a better look at what was occurring in that moment. At times, he could pick up the personality of the person while touching an object. He could also see the vision from the point of view that the subject was seeing at the time. The possibilities were endless, and the writers took advantage of how Johnny's abilities worked, making some amazing episodes in the process. One of my favorites is the episode Cabin Pressure. In this episode, Johnny and Purdy are on a flight when Johnny has a vision of the plane crashing. What I loved about it was that it became a detective story, where Johnny had to piece together what would cause the crash through his visions. Did one of the pilots crash the plane? If so, then why? Was it that one of them was in love with a stewardess and couldn't live without her? Was one of the pilots suicidal? Could there be terrorists on board? The actual answer would end up being a complete surprise to me. Then you had Unreasonable Doubt, an episode which served as a tribute to Sidney Lumet's 12 Angry Men. It posed the question, if you knew that an accused murderer was innocent because of your visions, how could you prove it legally? But one of my top 5 favorite episodes was Zion, which was about Bruce and his importance in Johnny's life. During the funeral for Bruce's father, Johnny touches him as he is touching his father's body. This shoots him into an alternate universe, where Bruce never met Johnny Smith. Because of this, Johnny becomes deranged, and like the movie version of Johnny Smith, becomes obsessed with stopping the apocalypse by attempting to assassinate Greg Stilson. Even though it was cool to see the butterfly effect that Bruce's absence had on Johnny and those around him, it was Bruce's relationship with his father that set this episode apart from the others. I asked John to elaborate more on how this script came to fruition.
Yeah, so they'd started working on that probably about a season ahead because I was banging on the producers to let them cut my hair. At this point, I'd had my dreadlocks for about 6 years, almost 7 years, and I was ready to get rid of them. And I'm telling them, I was like, man, I want to do this, I want to do this, I want to do this. And they were like, no, 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 no. And so I was like, yeah, man, I want to cut my hair. And so they started to develop this, I don't know if you want to call it cathartic, but it was they were going to make a point of why, if I was going to cut my hair, why I was going to do it. And I think that may have been where the development of this, of that came from. And I think Michael, if I'm mistaken, Mike, if I'm giving you credit and you didn't do it and I'm taking it away from somebody else, but I think Michael Taylor wrote the episode that I did, and he called me, he interviewed me for the episode. And a lot of what you see, even from my dialogue, is from things that I directly said. And the church scene, when I talk about not being able to dance, only black man in all of West Indianapolis can't dance that. When I say that line to him, that came from the conversation that I had with Mike Taylor, because I can't dance. I know they think all black people can dance. Like I could two-step, I can hit a little boogie and a spin on you, but I'm not out here doing footwork. And it's like I can't dance. But I'm telling him that, and he's listening. He put some of those things into the episode. So it was, I don't want to say loosely biographical, but it took parts from my life. The way I grew up in the Deep South. I was like the first black kid to graduate from my high school in Walkertown, North Carolina. And so all of those things about being a black man in a white world, more or less, is what Johnny is trying to get at when he's talking to Bruce is trying to get at when he's talking, is what I had experienced and what I'd shared with Michael Taylor. And so that episode was definitely one that reflected my life, absolutely reflected my life.
In Zion, we discover that Bruce's father is a reverend who's estranged from his son. It's a deeply emotional episode that deals with faith and following your heart even when the people you love don't understand. One of the best parts of the episode was who they chose to play the role of his father, the late, great Lou Gossett Jr. John talked about finding out who would play his father and what it was like acting with Mr. Gossett.
I remember when Sean Pillar came up to me and told me that Lou Gossett was going to be playing my dad. And I was like, yeah, right. Why don't you get Tupac while you're at it? So like Tupac had died like 5 years earlier. I'm just like, there's no way Lou Gossett Jr. is going to be my pops. I remember seeing him in An Officer and a Gentleman and Iron Eagle and all these features that he had done. And so it was a dream come true to work with someone who was as iconic as he is, to be the first or the second black male to win an Academy Award. After Sidney Poitier. And so I was astounded to be able to work with him. He was a very gracious guy, and it was a great experience, man.
But I think I always gravitated towards the smaller, character-based episodes of the show. Dinner with Dana was another favorite of mine, as it served as the culmination for Dana and Johnny's romance. From the beginning, you could tell that Michael and Kristen have massive chemistry with each other. Dalton told me a bit about what it was like to act with Anthony Michael Hall.
I had met Anthony Michael Hall, I call him Michael, previously, and I would say that he is of the highest caliber of an actor. I mean, I truly would. I've worked with a lot of actors, and I just felt like when we were working on something, especially when we had something to sink our teeth into a little bit, he shows up, and that's what I love too. It's not just the same cookie cutter every single time. It's very nuanced, and we get it. And the more we sort of play around with it, the more layers it gets. And so I really remember that fully working with Michael. He's, he always shows up on time. He knows all his lines, and he's a true professional that I saw at all times. And I just really enjoyed working with him.
To be frank, I preferred the Johnny and Dana relationship to the one between Johnny and Sarah. I know we were supposed to root for him to eventually find his way back to Sarah, but I thought Walt was a better fit for her, which is why I thought the choice in the last season that they made with Walt was a massive mistake. But let's get back to this episode though, which would revolve around Dana and Johnny having an interview over dinner. Johnny has visions of Dana's past and the abusive relationship she used to be in. Kristen told me about when she found out there would be an episode that was focused on Dana.
I was really excited. It's a bottle episode, and usually we'd have a lot more time. And this one was shot, I think it was shot in 5 days, the whole thing. And I was given the script the night before, and I was very excited, of course, because I felt like, this is, something I could sink my teeth into, and felt like it really, I like that in all writing. I've always believed that characters should be fleshed out. It just makes them so much more interesting. Like, let's show their backstory and why they are the way they are, and then how all these different characters with all their backstories come together, and then it makes you see them differently. Their relationships when you bring their past experiences on screen. So I was very happy about it. I was long hours because of the short days of shooting, and I was stressed about a few things. But when they tell you all of a sudden you're going to be in underwear and you haven't been working out, that can make you insecure and feel not as confident in your character. No matter how much you've been working out, you like to be prepared for all these things. So the director of that episode was John Cassar, and I felt they had really stepped it up with the director on that episode, because he was really good. I felt like he really, when people really do their job so well, it sort of makes you feel safer to do your job, and you don't have to worry about anything. You could just be in the moment. And when I was having a moment when I had to be, like I said, like in my underwear and stuff like that, he cleared the set. He was protective. He made me feel safe. He gave me a safe space to work in. And I would notice if something in a scene wasn't feeling quite right. And what I loved is right off the bat, he was like, he noticed the same thing. So immediately I clicked with him and was like, okay, he has an eye and he knows exactly what he's doing, and he's good. So I don't have to worry about that. I can just do my job, and that he won't let me fail. You know what I mean? So I thoroughly enjoyed it. Absolutely.
We also find out how her father traumatized her by locking her in her room for hours. Kristen's acting was incredible, since she had to play Dana hiding her vulnerability with Johnny and at the same time showing him the truth through his visions. Not a lot of actors could portray that duality, and I think Kristen knocked it out of the park. If you ask me, many actors should watch this episode to learn how to better their acting ability. Kristen told me a bit about how she prepared for this role.
I had no idea. I mean, I figured the way I came in with it, her name gave something to it, Dana Bright, and she's a fast-talking reporter, and she's tough, and, she has a lot of walls up. She's good at her job, and she's a career woman. And so I had all of that. And what I usually do is write a diary of my character as if I'm that person, sort of all the things I've gone through in my life and as that character, so that I have certain feelings, certain things will trigger me when it comes up in dialogue or emotionally or what part of me is shut down, what part of me, like, turns it up.
This episode would also have one of the funniest moments of the series, where Johnny begins to have visions of other people around him while they begin to become intimate. The chemistry between this cast was key to making the show a success. When I asked John about his relationship with Anthony Michael Hall off set and how that translated to their off-screen performances, he said,
my relationship with Anthony Michael Hall and just who I am as a person, I mean, I think we got along well. Anthony Michael Hall's from New York. I like New Yorkers. Before I made the decision to move out to California, like I was thinking about moving to New York. I just dig New York. So, when we got on set, we just kind of bonded over some of the things that I like about New York. We got along pretty quickly. And on top of that, the director at the time, and shout out to him, rest in peace, Rob Lieberman, who passed last year. He did a fantastic job of bringing us together right when I got on set. This was my second series regular, but it was, I don't know, it's like there's levels to it. I was nervous on Just Deal, but I wasn't aware of the stakes as to why I should be as nervous as I was. When I got to the Dead Zone, I'm like, this is a really big deal. This is like a episodic, it's an hour long, and so on and so forth. And so first couple of takes were a little clunky, but Lieberman came over and he was like, yo, let's talk. And talked me through it. Man, I love that guy, miss him, had a great relationship with him. But it was his direction as well as our individual personalities that just jibed. And so from that time forward, is, for lack of a better word, it wasn't a buddy comedy, but whereas he was the lead, if you saw me, you saw him. Yeah. So it was like a Batman and Robin type situation. And we just got along, man. We talked about everything. We talked maybe Michael, between takes, we just talk about, whether it's music, religion, life, whatever the case may be. We just got along, man.
At the end of season 1, Greg Stilson would be introduced, played by young Indiana Jones himself, Sean Patrick Flannery. Flannery was great at playing Stilson as a ruthless and clever criminal whose lust for power would lead to the destruction of the world. In fact, the show would have many great guest stars. One of my favorites would be in one of the most famous episodes of the series, Plague. The episode revolves around Johnny trying to stop an airborne disease that originated from China from creating a pandemic that will kill thousands of people in his town. And it's disturbing how accurate this was to what we experienced with COVID in 2020. Don't believe me? Listen to this clip from the episode.
We still need to isolate and identify whatever it is that's making these kids sick so we can really treat it.
How long is it going to take? Well, it took 34 days to isolate the coronavirus that caused SARS, and that's fast.
Pretty creepy how this would mirror reality 17 years later. The choice they got to play the health inspector, Dr. Jim Pratt, was inspired. Stephen Tobolowsky. I know that he's known as a character actor, but for many years I always just saw him as the annoying Ned Ryerson from Groundhog Day. This episode really drove home how versatile Stephen Tobolowsky is, and now I light up whenever I see him in any role, big or small, on TV or film. Throughout the seasons, the characters would evolve, particularly Dana and Johnny, who broke up when she chose to pursue her career. I asked Kristen on why she had left the show.
I feel like there were some missed opportunities with my character, because what we thought, and when I was talking with Michael, is that we were thinking, the psychic and the reporter can solve mysteries very well together, especially if there's a sort of, I don't know, at the time there was a show, Moonlighting, I don't know if you remember that, that they can have this on again, off again sort of tumultuous relationship that's very interesting, but they're both have their things and that they bring to the table and work together. So I thought kind of that's where it was going, but I believe they started trying to make each episode stand on its own and be more episodic rather than a through line. So I would be in one episode, we would be just having this incredible connection and solving a mystery together and making out. In the next episode, I'd be in the crowd, with the reporters, Johnny, can I get a quote? So it would, it didn't always keep a strong thread. And that's why with Dinner with Dana, I was like, oh, okay, here we go. Now we're building characters and we can really build and grow from here. I'm not really sure exactly what happened. Just that, the new season came along and I wasn't in it, and nobody told me why, but it was fine because I was off and about doing new stuff. I was pretty happy. I thought it was sort of a perfect amount of time.
Greg Stilson would fall in love with Sarah, which would almost alter the future so that the apocalypse would never happen. In season 6, Gene accidentally gets Walt killed in a fire and leaves due to his guilt. I thought killing Walt was a big mistake, because as I stated before, I always preferred Sarah and Johnny never resuming their relationship. In the book, they don't. In fact, she would leave him forever after they gave into their desires and had a one-night stand. It is a tragic moment in the book. It was something that I feel Stephen King's stories had, which was an underlying sense of personal tragedy. Even though the show would make it to 6 seasons, it would sadly get canceled due to the cost of making the show on top of low ratings. Worst of all, it also ended on a cliffhanger. I asked John about the cancellation of the series, and if they knew that they would not have a 7th season.
I mean, well, so I think the only actor who was on the production side was Anthony Michael Hall. But, it's also kind of like you see the signs. You're like, okay, we're not in Vancouver anymore. We're going to another city. We're in our 6th season. And so there are things that you kind of like, okay, this might be the end of it, but you got your fingers crossed and you're hoping. And then on top of that, even with the show coming to an end, there was still hope. There was still us holding out hope that they were going to do a movie. Like there was like talks that they're going to do a movie to like wrap up the series, because you still have the unfinished business of Greg Stilson and him starting World War III and destroying the world, and Michael Hall trying to stop him. In the actual movie of The Dead Zone, you see Christopher Walken attempt to kill the presidential candidate Martin Sheen. So we're like, okay, are we going to do something like that? And that didn't really happen. And so I think that even with the show getting canceled, the thing that was the most heartbreaking or disappointing was the fact that we weren't able to wrap everything up. But beyond that, it was like, did we think it? Yeah, no, nobody told us. We didn't know, but you kind of like see the signs, kind of the writing on the wall. So when it happened, while it was disappointing, it was kind of expected.
But since the cancellation, many of the cast have gone on to do new projects. Anthony Michael Hall has had himself some memorable roles in films like The Dark Knight and Halloween Kills. Both Nicole DeBoer and Kristen Dalton have been working steadily in TV and film. John Adams was on a great show recently called Wolfpack before it sadly got canceled. I asked him what he was up to these days.
So I moved out here to start doing stand-up. I'm doing stand-up again. I'm performing all around the city. And so people can come, they can see me, they come out, they can support me. You can follow me on Comic John L. Adams on Instagram. And you'll get updates as to where I am and what I'm doing.
As for the Dead Zone coming back, it seems like the chances of that are, pun not intended, dead. Anthony Michael Hall has said that although he's open to coming back to the role, he feels that he's just too old, and it may be better to just reboot the show with a younger cast. If you're interested or curious in revisiting the show for yourself, you can watch it on various streaming platforms. The one that I recommend the most is Tubi, because it's free. Rewatching the Dead Zone series, I am glad to say that it still holds up. In fact, I think it's even better than when I originally saw it. This show had all the hallmarks of a gone far too soon TV show. It was full of creative scripts, amazing action, innovative special effects, and most importantly, full of talented actors who I hope to see more of in the future. So why don't you folks go pick up your remote and prepare to enter a world full of second chances and possible dark futures. I promise you're gonna enjoy it. It's fate. I'm Jesse Shade speaking on behalf of David Arroyo for JoBlo.com, and thanks again for watching our show. If you like what you see, please subscribe to the JoBlo Originals channel. Tell all your friends who like this sort of content, and turn on the bell to receive notifications for all our latest videos. We are an independent company that appreciates all of your support, and we will see you next time on the next episode of Gone, but Not Forgotten.